"We can't have you at Christmas," my sister texted. "Mark's family are executives. Your factory job would ruin everything." I replied, "Understood." 3 days later, Mark walked into a board meeting and started screaming. My sister's text came in at 11:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, while I was standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of my corner office on the 34th floor, watching the Charles River go gray under a December sky, waiting for my assistant to confirm the Whitmore board was assembled. "We can't have you at Christmas this year, Nina. Mark's family are all senior executives and old money. And honestly, your factory background would just make everyone uncomfortable. You understand, right? It's not personal. Love you." My mother followed 2 minutes and 14 seconds later. I know the exact gap because I was still holding the phone when it buzzed again. "Nina, sweetheart, don't be upset. You just feel out of place with your rough hands and those boots you always wear. Stay home, order pizza, get some rest. We'll send pictures and call on Christmas morning." I read both messages twice, set the phone face down on my desk. "Ms. Johnson?" My assistant Carla's voice came through the intercom. Calm, precise, 18 years of corporate discretion in every syllable. "The Whitmore delegation has arrived. All parties are present in Conference B. The board is ready." "Send them in," I said. "And Carla, make sure my nameplate is visible from the door." "Already done," she said. I picked up my portfolio, buttoned my jacket, charcoal Armani, the one I bought the week after I sold my first company, the one I wore to every meeting that mattered, and walked down the hall to end Mark Whitmore's career. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to where this actually started, because the Christmas text wasn't the beginning, not even close. The beginning was a plastics factory in Worcester, Massachusetts in the winter of 2009, when I was 22 years old and working the night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., running an injection molding line that paid $90.40 an hour and left machine oil under my fingernails that I could never quite get fully clean. I wore steel-toed boots and a hard hat with my name written on the back in black marker. I smelled like solvent on the bus home every morning. I was also, during those same 3 years, taking 18 credit hours a semester at night and on weekends at UMass Boston's business program, surviving on 4 hours of sleep and dining hall coffee, building case studies and financial models in the break room of the factory between production runs on a secondhand Dell laptop I had paid $230 for at a pawn shop on Commonwealth Avenue. My mother told her friends I was finding myself in the industrial sector. My sister Emily, 4 years younger and in the middle of an art history degree our parents were happily funding, told her college roommates I worked in manufacturing, with a specific downward inflection that communicated everything she meant without having to say it. I graduated top of my class in May 2012. I remember sitting in the folding chair in the gymnasium in my rented cap and gown, and I remember my mother taking pictures and looking genuinely proud, and I remember thinking, she has no idea what I'm about to do. And she won't ask. She didn't ask. I started my first company, Meridian Supply Chain Solutions, at 24, out of a shared co-working space in Cambridge with 2 other people, running logistics optimization software for mid-sized manufacturers who were bleeding money on inefficient distribution. I knew the problem from the inside. I had watched it for 3 years from a factory floor. We bootstrapped for 18 months, raised a Series A of $4.2 million from a firm called Keller Venture Partners in 2014, grew to 41 employees. I sold Meridian in November 2017 for $40 million to a logistics conglomerate called Freightcor International. I was 29 years old. I did not tell my family the number. I told them I had sold the company, and it had gone well. My mother said, "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Are you going to take a vacation?" My sister texted a thumbs-up emoji and asked if I could Venmo her $400 for a weekend trip she was planning. I sent the $400. At 32, I became CEO of Apex Holdings, a mid-market private equity firm specializing in distressed acquisitions. We identified companies with sound underlying assets being destroyed by bad management, bought them, rebuilt the leadership and operational structure, and either held them for cash flow or sold them at multiples that made our investors very happy. I had built Apex from a $60 million fund to just over $900 million in assets under management in 4 years. My family did not know any of this, not because I hid it. I had stopped explaining myself to people who didn't ask, which is a different thing. My mother called on my birthday and Christmas, and occasionally when she needed help navigating her insurance portal. Emily called when she needed money, which was more often than I will describe here, and when she wanted an audience for the ongoing drama of her personal life, which was extensive. They knew I worked in business and investments, and they had long ago decided this was my version of still being near the factory, respectable enough to mention, unimpressive enough to dismiss. I let them. It was easier than the conversation that would follow if I didn't. I had a life that I was genuinely proud of. I had work that I found meaningful. I had people around me, colleagues, a small circle of real friends, a therapist named Dr. Renata Sorrell, who I'd been seeing for 6 years and who once told me, with characteristic directness, "Nina, you have built an extraordinary life inside a family that has decided, for their own psychological convenience, to not notice. At some point, you'll have to decide whether to correct them or release them. I was still deciding. Then Emily met Mark Whitmore. She called me in February of last year, vibrating with a particular frequency I recognized. The one that meant a man had entered the picture who checked specific boxes she had been compiling since approximately age 16. Old money, connected family, the kind of last name that opened certain doors. She'd met him at a charity gala in Boston. He was VP of operations at his father's shipping company, Whitmore Logistics, which had been a Boston institution since 1987. She described him as sophisticated and worldly, and the kind of man who actually knows which fork to use. I said the things a sister says. I was happy for her. I meant it. I did not know his last name for the first 3 months she was dating him, because Emily had a habit of referring to everyone in her life by first name only, as though last names were a formality for people without social radar. By May, I knew his last name. By May, so did my entire acquisition team, for entirely unrelated reasons. Whitmore Logistics had been on our radar since January. One of my senior analysts, a 34-year-old named Daniel Park, who had the specific gift of finding value in chaos, had flagged it as a potential target in the first week of the year. The company had $340 million in annual revenue at its peak 3 years earlier. By the time Daniel brought it to me, it was at $197 million and falling. East Coast shipping routes that were genuinely valuable. The kind of established relationships and port access that take decades to build. But the operational structure was a wreck. The expense reporting was grotesque. A $12 million contract with a pharmaceutical distributor had been lost the previous October. The deadline for renewal had passed without response because, according to the internal communications Daniel had obtained through our due diligence process, the VP of operations had been in Aspen that week and was unreachable. The VP of operations was Mark Whitmore. I found this out on a Thursday afternoon in May, sitting at my desk reviewing the due diligence file that my legal team had assembled. Full name, employment history, performance record. I sat with that information for about 4 minutes. Then I called my lead deal attorney. Thomas, I said, I need you to confirm something for me. The VP of operations at Whitmore, Mark Whitmore, is he the owner's son? Thomas Brennan, 26 years in M&A law, formerly of Sullivan and Cromwell, currently my outside counsel on every significant transaction. Yes, Richard Whitmore's son. He was installed in the role 3 years ago. Why? He's dating my sister, I said. A pause. Do you want to pull out of the acquisition? I thought about that. I thought about it for longer than I'll admit. The acquisition had been in development for 6 months. The fundamentals were sound. The assets were real. The problem, the only problem, was the man running it into the ground. No, I said, but I want every piece of the performance documentation bulletproof. Every late arrival, every expense report anomaly, every missed deadline. I want it all independently verified. I will not have this look like anything other than exactly what it is. Understood, Thomas said. Over the next 4 months, Thomas Brennan and his team assembled what he would later describe to me as the most thoroughly documented case of executive negligence I have seen in 2.5 decades. The file was 340 pages. It included time-stamped access logs from the Whitmore building, showing Mark's arrival and departure times. It included expense reports with itemized charges, $4,200 for a dinner with no business contact listed, $11,000 in Aspen resort charges expensed during the week the pharmaceutical contract lapsed, a $6,800 charge at a Scotch whiskey retailer described in the report as client entertainment. It included the pharmaceutical distributor correspondence showing 18 days of unanswered emails preceding the contract expiration. It included a sworn statement from a Whitmore operations manager named Carol Delaney, who had been with the company for 14 years and who had sent documented internal complaints about Mark's attendance and decision-making to Richard Whitmore's office on 4 separate occasions, all of which had been filed without response. I had no plans to accelerate the timeline. The acquisition was moving at exactly the pace it should. Then my sister uninvited me to Christmas. I want to be precise about something, because I have seen the version of this story that people tell themselves. The revenge narrative, the scorned woman weaponizing corporate power. That is not what happened. What happened is that I had been building a legitimate case for a legitimate acquisition for the better part of a year. The acquisition was ready to close, and I received a text message from my sister that crystallized, in a single paragraph, exactly what my family had believed about me for 15 years. And I made a decision. I was done managing their comfort at the expense of my own reality. I closed the acquisition on December 18th. Richard Whitmore, 63 years old, third generation shipping, exhausted from watching his father's company deteriorate, had been in negotiations with us for 6 weeks. He was not a bad man. He was a father who had installed his son in a role the son was not equipped for, and had spent 3 years watching the consequences compound, and had run out of options. Our final meeting before closing was just the two of us and Thomas Brennan in my conference room, and Richard Whitmore shook my hand with both of his and said, I need you to save what's left of this. Please. I told him I would. Full operational control transferred to Apex Holdings at 8 a.m. on December 19th. I had asked Carla to schedule the leadership meeting for 9 a.m. that Thursday, December 21st. I had asked her to include specifically the VP of operations and his father. I had not specified to anyone in the Whitmore organization who would be leading the meeting. My assistant buzzed me in at 8:55 5 that morning. The Whitmore delegation is here. 4 people: Richard Whitmore, Mark Whitmore, their CFO, and their outside counsel. Mark Whitmore is currently explaining to the catering staff that the sparkling water should have been San Pellegrino and not domestic. A beat. He's asked for it to be replaced. Tell them I'll be 5 minutes, I said. I gave it 6. There is a specific thing that happens when I walk into a room. I'm aware of it. The way it changes, the way attention reorganizes. I have never fully gotten used to it, and I've stopped trying to. I walked through the conference room doors, and the room went quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when the air pressure changes. Richard Whitmore stood immediately. Good instincts, developed over decades. He didn't know me yet, but he recognized something. Mark stayed seated. He was looking at me the way people look at something that doesn't compute. The expression of a man whose internal filing system has encountered a category error. He knew my face. He had seen it in Emily's phone, probably. In whatever context Emily had presented me, the factory-adjacent sister, the financial underachiever, the family member who would feel out of place at Christmas with old money. I sat down at the head of the table, opened my portfolio. My nameplate was centered in front of me, exactly where Carla had placed it an hour earlier. Nina Johnson, Chief Executive Officer, Apex Holdings, Inc. I watched Mark read it. I watched him read it again. I watched his eyes move to my face. Back to the nameplate. Back to my face. His voice came out wrong. Too thin. He pointed at me. An actual point. Index finger extended. The kind of gesture that people make when their social training has momentarily collapsed entirely. You're Emily's sister, Nina. I didn't confirm or deny. I uncapped my pen. I want to thank everyone for coming in this morning, I said. Given the change in ownership, I wanted to meet with senior leadership directly to discuss the path forward for Whitmore Logistics. No, Mark's chair scraped back. He was standing now and I could see what was happening to him. The color leaving his face, the jaw tightening, the particular expression of a man watching his assumptions detonate in real time. No, this is Dad. She's a factory worker. Emily told me. She's not. She can't be. She's the CEO, Mark, Richard Whitmore said quietly. He was still looking at the table. Sit down. Mark did not sit down. This is a setup, he said. His voice had climbed. I watched the CFO and the outside counsel exchange a look that they immediately suppressed. This is insane. She's doing this because of Christmas. She bought our company because Emily didn't invite her to Christmas dinner. I let that sit in the room for a moment. You vastly overestimate your own importance, I said. I kept my voice level. Not cold, level. The kind of calm that isn't performed, that just is. I don't allocate hundreds of millions of dollars based on holiday dinner guest lists. I opened the audit file. 340 pages, tabbed and indexed, 1 copy for each party. I slid them down the table. But since the topic of your employment has come up, let's discuss Aspen. October 14th through 21st of last year. The pharmaceutical distribution contract, $12 million annual renewal, deadline October 17th. Your office received 18 emails in the 11 days before the deadline, all unanswered. The contract lapsed. The client signed with a competitor. Mark's face was doing something I didn't have a name for. Tab 4, I said. Your expense reports from the past 36 months. The $11,000 Aspen resort charges, same week as the lapsed contract. Tab 6, building access logs. Your average arrival time over the past year was 10:42 a.m. Your average departure was 3:17 p.m. I paused. Tab 9 is a compilation of 4 internal complaints filed with your father's office by Carol Delaney, your operations manager, over a period of 14 months. All documented, all unaddressed. Richard Whitmore had not moved. He was looking at the file with the expression of a man reading something he had always known and spent years not reading. As part of the acquisition agreement, I said, Richard Whitmore transferred full operational authority to Apex Holdings at 8 a.m. this morning. In my capacity as CEO and new operational authority, I am eliminating the VP of Operations position, effective immediately. The termination is without severance, per the performance clauses in the employment contract, which your outside counsel will find referenced at tab 12. You cannot do this, Mark said. His voice was almost unrecognizable now. The sophisticated old money register completely gone, replaced with something raw and young and frightened. You cannot do this to me. I will sue you. I will bury you. Emily will never forgive you for this, you hear me? Your mother will never speak to you again. You are dead to this family. Mark, his father said. Mark's palms hit the table. The sound was flat and hard. She's doing this because she's jealous, he shouted. Because Emily found something real, and she has nothing, and she is a pathetic, washed-up factory worker who got lucky. Security, I said. The doors opened. 3 guards. Calm, efficient. The particular professionalism of people who have done this enough times that it no longer registers as dramatic to them. Mark looked at the doors, looked at me, looked at his father. Richard Whitmore did not look up from the table. Your personal items will need to be cleared within 30 minutes, I said. Someone from facilities will supervise. Building access ends at 10 a.m. Dad. Mark's voice broke on the word, a sound I almost didn't expect. Dad, tell her. Tell her she can't. She can, Richard Whitmore said. He still hadn't looked up. She already did. They walked Mark out through the glass doors. He was still talking. To the guards, to the hallway, to no one. And then the doors closed and the sound stopped and the room exhaled. The CFO and the outside counsel were looking at their files with the focused attention of people who are desperately grateful to have something to look at. I turned to Richard Whitmore. Now, I said, clicking my pen, let's discuss the fleet restructuring. I think think we can recover the Northeast routes inside of 18 months if we move on the staffing changes by Q1. He looked up. His eyes were red at the edges, but his expression had settled into something I recognized. The particular clarity of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally put it down. Yes, he said. He pulled out his own pen. Where do you want to start? We worked for 3 hours and 11 minutes. His institutional knowledge of the company was deep and detailed and completely wasted under the structure he'd been operating in. By noon, we had a preliminary restructuring framework that Thomas Brennan would spend the next 2 weeks converting into binding operational documents. I walked Richard Whitmore to the elevator at 12:23 p.m. He stopped at the doors and turned to me. She really didn't tell you, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Emily? No, she doesn't know what I do. He processed that. How is that possible? She never asked, I said. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, my son is... He isn't. What you saw today isn't entirely who he is. He stopped. Tried again. He was given too much too soon. And I let it happen. And I have to live with that. I know, I said. That's not my problem to solve, but the company is. And I will. He nodded. The elevator came. I walked back to my office, sat down in my chair, and looked out at the river for about 90 seconds. Then my phone lit up. Incoming call. Emily. I let it ring twice. The particular space of 2 rings is interesting. Long enough to be noticed, short enough to not be a statement. I picked up and hit speaker. Her first sound wasn't a word. It was the sound of someone who has been holding something together with their hands and has just felt it give way. Not a cry, not a scream, something between the two. Something that took up the full first 3 seconds of the call. Nina. Her voice was shaking in a way I had never heard from her. Not once in 35 years of being her sister. What did you do? What did you do? I didn't answer immediately. He called me from the parking lot, she said. He said you fired him. He said you bought the company and you fired him and had him escorted out by security. He said, her voice fractured. He said you did it because of Christmas. Emily, did you? Did you do this because of Christmas? No, I said. I've been acquiring Whitmore Logistics for 6 months. Mark was removed because he lost a $12 million contract while he was skiing in Aspen, because he was arriving at work after 10 a.m. and leaving before 3 p.m., and because 4 of his own employees filed formal complaints about his performance that were ignored because his father owned the company. None of that has anything to do with Christmas dinner. A long silence. You're the CEO of a private equity firm, she said slowly, like she was reading something in a language she was just learning to parse. I have been for 4 years. And before that, you sold my first company. Yes, for $40 million in 2017. A sound. Small. Involuntary. Why didn't you tell us? And there it was, the question. The one that had been building for 15 years under 1,000 small silences and unreturned curiosities and birthday calls that were really just ambient noise management. You didn't ask, Emily, I said. Not with anger, just with the flat, factual weight of a true thing. In 15 years, neither you nor Mom asked me a single real question about my work. Not one. You decided what my life looked like. And you held on to that picture because it was more comfortable than looking at the actual one. That's not fair. The Christmas text, I said. The one about your factory background, your rough hands, and your awful boots. That text is why Mark thought what he thought. Because you have been telling people a story about me for 15 years, and you believed it, and so did he. She was crying now. Real crying. The kind you can't modulate. I didn't know, she said. I genuinely didn't know. I know you didn't. That's the part that should keep you up at night. Not that you got it wrong, that you never tried to get it right. I looked out at the river. It had started to snow, fine and sideways, the Charles going pewter gray under the early afternoon light. I'm not going to help Mark with this, I said. I want to be direct with you about that. The documentation is thorough and the termination is legally bulletproof. Thomas Brennan has been doing this for 26 years and he does not make procedural errors. I know, she whispered, but I am not your enemy. I am your sister. And if you want to have an actual conversation, not about this, not about Mark, just a real conversation about who we actually are, I'd like that. I have always wanted that. She didn't say anything for a moment. You paid for Christmas, she said finally, in a strange, small voice. You sent me $400 for that trip. You always send money when I ask. Yes, and you have Emily. I'm so embarrassed, she said. I know. I'm so sorry. I know that too. The snow was picking up. I watched it hit the glass. Each flake distinct for a split second before dissolving. The boots, I said after a moment. What? The boots you mentioned in the text that I always wear. Yeah, I wear them because I like them, I said. I have always liked them. I wear them to board meetings. I wore them the day we closed this acquisition. A pause. They're good boots. A sound from Emily that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. The specific frequency of someone who is just beginning to understand something very large and is not sure yet whether it will break them or rearrange them. Okay, she said. Okay, I said. I ended the call, sat with the quiet for a minute, pulled up Thomas Brennan's email and confirmed the Whitmore documentation chain of custody was sealed and filed. Sent a note to Daniel Park thanking him for the initial analysis that had started all of this 8 months earlier before any of it was personal. Then I opened my desk drawer, pulled out a sheet of paper, and wrote a note to Carol Delaney, the operations manager who had filed 4 complaints that no one had answered. I told her she was going to be the interim VP of operations operations pending a formal search. I told her she had been seen, even when the people who should have seen her hadn't. I told her she was exactly the kind of person this company needed running things. I had Carla messenger it to the Whitmore building that afternoon. 3 months later, Whitmore Logistics Q1 numbers were up 14%. Carol Delaney had been formally appointed VP of Operations. The pharmaceutical client had come back to the table, not the lost contract, but a new one. $9 million with a renewal clause. My mother called me in January. Not on my birthday, which wasn't for months. Just called. A Tuesday. I almost didn't recognize the register of it. Not a need, not an occasion. Just a call. I talked to Emily, she said. She told me things. About your work. About everything. Okay, I said. I didn't know, Nina. I want you to know that She stopped. I told myself a story about you, and I kept telling it, and I never checked whether it was true. That was wrong of me. That was a terrible thing to do to you. I sat with that. Thank you for saying that, I said. Can I ask you now? She said. Can I ask you about your work? What you actually do? I'd like to understand. Yes, I said. I'd like that. We talked for 2 hours. She asked good questions. Better than I expected, actually. She had always been smart, my mother, in ways that had gotten buried under the specific anxieties of status and belonging that had defined her social world for 30 years. Underneath all of that was a woman who was genuinely curious. I had always known that. I had just forgotten it was still there. Emily and Mark did not recover. I don't say that with satisfaction. There's nothing satisfying about watching someone's relationship end. Not even a relationship you have complicated feelings about. But Emily called me in February, steady and clear in a way I hadn't heard from her in years, and said, I think I was in love with a version of him that didn't exist. I think I built him the same way Mom and I built you, out of what I wanted to see instead of what was there. That's a hard thing to figure out, I said. I know, she said. Thank you for not protecting me from it. I got to Boston for Easter. My mother made a ham. Emily came. We sat at the kitchen table for 5 hours and talked about things we had never talked about. It wasn't healed, not all of it, maybe not even most of it, but it was real. For the first time in a long time, we were in the same room without performing a version of each other. My mother asked toward the end of the night why I had never corrected them earlier. Why I'd let the story persist for so long. I thought about that. Because I kept hoping you'd ask, I said. And every time you didn't, I told myself it didn't matter. And eventually I built a life that was so complete that I genuinely stopped needing you to. And then you sent that Christmas text and I realized the problem wasn't that I needed you to see me. It was that I was still making myself invisible so you wouldn't have to. My mother looked at me for a long moment. The boots, she said quietly. The boots. You wore them today. I wear them everywhere, I said. They're good boots. She laughed, really laughed, and I laughed too. And outside the kitchen window, Boston was finally thawing, the last of the winter going soft and gray at the edges, the way things do when they're done holding on. I drove home that night with the windows down despite the cold, and I thought about Carol Delaney's latest operations report, 12 pages, precise and confident, the work of someone who had been waiting a long time to be handed the wheel. I thought about my grandmother's kitchen table and my $230 pawn shop laptop, and the 6 a.m. bus home smelling like solvent. I thought about a man in a parking lot outside a Boston boardroom calling his fiancée to report that a factory worker had just ended his career. I thought about all the doors I had opened by being exactly what I was. The boots were, in fact, very good boots.